pretty windy up here today. Try and get some smoke in there. So with these hives, the way they're set up right now is the bottom box is their brood chamber. That's where the queen is roaming and laying eggs, and they're caring for the young. The top box, there's a queen excluder in between, and in the top box, the queen can't access, so the bees don't rear any brood up there. What they do is they pack it full of honey, and then at the end of the year, it just is nice. It keeps the honey separate from the brood, and I can determine how much honey I need to leave for the bees, how much I can take myself, without having to worry about there being kind of brood mixed in between. And when I say brood, I'm referring to the eggs or the larvae or the capped brood. So when the larvae is big enough, the bees cap it, the cell, and the larvae pupates inside and turns from a larvae into a honeybee. The bees use what's called propolis, which I think they collect from plants. It's like a resin, and they use it to stick everything together inside the hive. So everything can get stuck together pretty good. Oh yeah. You can see the bees here. They're filling it up. I won't pull any frames, but I can tell you there's a good amount of weight in the box. So this is the queen excluder. The queen can't fit up through the screen, only the worker bees can. So it just stops her from getting up here to lay any eggs. The main point of this inspection today is because it is swarm season, and a lot of the bees are gearing up to swarm, which means that they're rearing a new queen, or maybe several new queens, and then the old queen will leave with about half the bees, start a new colony somewhere else, and the other half of the bees will remain here and raise that new queen. And what we don't want to happen is for them to do that on their own. If their heart's set on swarming, I can always split the hive myself, and it's just a more controlled way of having them divide. But with these two hives, I would rather not split. So I would rather just have them get through the summer as one colony, over winter, and then do the splits next spring. It's towards the end of June now. I'm not really too interested in making any more splits for the year. So we'll just go through and look for signs of swarming. So this is an example of a frame of brood. The big bulgy ones here are drones, so those are male bees. And the more flat section here is worker bees, female bees. And I'm just looking through for any signs of eggs, and also to see if the queen's on this frame, because I do want to leave this frame outside while I do the inspection. I want to make sure the queen's not on here. There's some pollen packed in the middle there. And yeah, so these here, let's see, this there is an example of a queen cup. There's nothing laid in it, but if there were to be, it's a sign that they're rearing a new queen and getting ready to swarm. It takes, I think, about 16 days for them to rear a queen. So this time of year, it's important to kind of get into the hives regularly, so you can catch them ahead of time if they're planning on creating a swarm. Smoker's kind of going out. I'll have to relight it, but the bees are pretty calm so far. Here's another frame of brood. And you probably can't see, but there are eggs in some of these empty cells, which is a sign that They're what's known as queen right, meaning that they have a queen that's laying. She seems to be doing a good job. I don't know if you can see there's some larvae in there. This is a frame that looks like it's got some older brood that's hatching out, and she's kind of come back in and laid up in the empty spaces again, which is what you want to see. Keep going. Same thing on this frame, and you can tell pretty much everything you need to know about the health of a honeybee colony just by inspecting the brood, making sure the queen is laying well. There's a good pattern to her laying. There's no sign of disease or dying brood, and so far so good. And I have a marker today. If I do see the queen, I'm gonna mark her just to make it easier to tell if they've ever requeened, or sometimes if they do swarm, it's kind of easier to spot the queen in the swarm if she's got a marking on. There's another queen cup there. Just looking in these queen cups to see if there's any eggs. There's always going to be queen cups around this time of year. There's another one on the edge there. But just making sure there's no eggs. Sometimes I just get rid of these queen cups, although they're just going to build them back up again. But just don't want them thinking about swarming. Again, more brood. There's some larvae in there that are just about to be capped, kind of at the later stages. Lots of pollen, lots of brood. Pollen that they store is for the bees to eat as they're developing. It's basically their protein source. There's some eggs in these cells. Often when I see the eggs, I I look a little closer, because those are the frames where the queen could be, or at least has been relatively recently. Oh, there she is. So the queen, she's the long black one. I guess at the bottom of this image, she's just crawling around kind of on my right side. So what I'm gonna do, place her on this outside rack very gently. I'm gonna grab my queen marking tool. Give her a green dot. Now where is she? She may have gone up and on to the other side. Oh, there she is. Try to gently just kind of knock her down into this cup. There she is. I use this, there's a drone that's a male bee right there. They don't have stingers. Okay. What I'll do here is make sure. Oh, there's a wasp right there eating a bee. So what I'll do, gently plunge this sponge, there we go, until her thorax is exposed. There it is. Give her a nice green dot. Now she's marked with a green dot. I'll let that dry for a second. So she can't get out. Now what I'll do is I'm gonna get these frames back in place. For now. While that paint dries and she's in the cage, it's kind of a good time to get everything back in order, and that way you know where the queen is. You're not so worried about accidentally crushing her. Quickly go through these last frames. Again, some good brood, some queen cups, but luckily they're not showing any larvae or eggs inside of there. And often on the bottom, but if you can see here, there's two of them that are right there. Crack them open to see if there's any eggs, which there's not. Often the last edge frames are usually just packed full of honey, but because there's just one brood frame, one brood chamber on this hive, they're using pretty well all of them to rear some brood. So I am gonna look and just make sure. Here we have honey, capped honey at the top, pollen in the middle, and then just a little bit of drone brood at the bottom. There's nothing there. Towards the end of the inspection, the bees are getting a little more grumpy, but it's okay. Almost done here. Okay, we can let the queen go again. See her in there, green dot on her. She keeps wanting to go back in the other way. There she is. Crawled back down there. That's good. Gently put the queen excluder back. Up. So that's good. This hive looks great. The brood looks good. The queen's laying. They are not laying in swarm cells, queen cells. So they're not swarming right now. That honey super is filling up. So pretty much everything I wanted to see. This hive seems to want to slide. Round two. I'm gonna get this smoker going again. This hive is the one that seems to usually be a bit grumpy. Yeah.
So maybe one day swap those out.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Those hives are getting pretty heavy too. Like I'm glad to see the honey supers filling up like that. So I'm gonna smoke. Put this entrance seducer back on. It just makes their entrance smaller, kind of easier to defend. We're coming up on wasp season here, yellow jackets, and they can be a real bother to the honeybee hives here. So if their entrance is small, they have a much better chance of guarding it. Kind of windy, so it's hard to kind of get the smoke down where it should be, but you can see the bees having trouble with the wind. This one is very heavy. It's a deep super. I think there could be 70 pounds of honey in there right now. Yeah. You can tell this hive's already grumpier. I'm gonna smoke them real good. The temperament of every hive is different. It also depends on the time of year and everything, but just the genetics, some are much more defensive than others. Sometimes if it's too much of a problem, you can switch out the queen, take the old one out, give them a new one. That new one might have a more gentle demeanor, and because she's the one laying all the eggs, her offspring will carry her traits. But this one, although they're angry, we're up here on the roof, quite a ways away from people, and I don't necessarily mind so much if they're that angry. Again, I'm using quite a bit of smoke. It's also windy, so a lot of the smoke's not even really making it down into the hive. Just kind of breaking this up so when I pull the frame, it doesn't crush as many bees. You can see there's a drone emerging from his cell right there. Drones take, or male bees, they take the longest to develop. Queens are the quickest, then worker bees, the females, and then drones. I think a worker bee is about 21 days, queen, like I said, about 16. I think a drone is closer to 27. What the drones do is they leave the colony and they go out there and they try to mate with any unmated queens from a different hive. So they're spreading the genetics of this colony out there into the world. They don't forage for food like nectar or pollen. They don't protect the hive. They don't really do anything for this colony other than spread those genes. And in fact, in the fall, you'll see the female worker bees dragging out the drones, not letting them back in the hive because over winter they're just a burden. They're not doing anything for the colony, and so they all get dragged out and don't overwinter with the rest of the colony. On the bottom here we have some drone brood, which is okay, but again, just looking for those queen cells. Looking for the queen. I'm not seeing any eggs in this frame, but it doesn't mean she's not on here. I had to guess at the amount of bees in this colony and the last one, I would say there's got to be 50,000 bees in each one, and their population fluctuates throughout the year. But we're heading into the peak of the season. Some different colored pollen throughout there in the middle. Same on this side, some brood on this end, pollen on this end. You often see the pollen near the brood because as soon as those worker bees emerge, they need to eat that pollen to develop. Like I said, the nectar that they collect in flowers, they turn into honey, and they eat that, and that's kind of like their energy source. But that pollen is the protein that the young bees need. I don't know if you can see that bee trying to get in. She's covered in pollen. You see that? Yeah. Yeah, and there was one where her whole body was just covered in yellow. On the bottom? Let's see here. Oh, see a couple eggs there. So again, because I see the eggs, I do want to try to find the queens just to mark her. Oftentimes, I'm not worried about finding the queen as long as I see eggs. I can see how she's laying, and I can see how the brood looks. And that's good enough. But like I said, wouldn't mind getting eyes on her just so I can put a dot. I was starting to heat up a little bit, get a little angrier. Josh is dressed in all black, just like a bear. Sure the bees appreciate that. More brood, pollen. There's a queen cup up here, but it looks like it's empty. Usually don't use smoke at all, and certainly not this much, but I find this colony's just been quite grumpy in the past. And they're grumpy now. see there's a good brood laying on this frame, almost from edge to edge. So the queen's doing a nice job. Quite a bit of brood on the bottom of these frames. On this one in particular, it's usually drone brood that they kind of fit in at the bottom, fit in at the sides wherever they can, and then flatter brood in the middle. That's the worker. With the brood it might be tough to see, but I'm always looking at the larva, trying to make sure it's a nice bright white. It's just an indicator of good health. Not seeing her there. Put the tool in here, I'm always just trying to be careful to make sure that there aren't bees in that little space that I'm crushing with the tool. The tough thing about doing these inspections is that you know, you do crush a couple bees, and it's a bit heartbreaking, but do what you can not to, and try to just make sure that, you know, when you're inspecting it, you have a purpose for doing so. And you try to get in and out as cautiously as you can. Oh, there she is. She's kind of in the middle, towards the middle of the frame. She's all black. I mean, all these honeybees that I keep here are a mix of different varieties, but the darker ones I think tend to be a bit more on the Carniolan side as opposed to the Italian side. Let's see if I can get her in here. When the queen's laying eggs like she is in this stage of her life, She can't fly. Before they swarm, if they are to swarm, queen stops laying, usually for a few days, and I think they kind of stop feeding her as much, and she lightens up, and then can fly away with the swarm. But like she is now, her abdomen is quite large, and don't have to worry as much about her flying away. Oh, okay. We can just finish up. I'm almost done here. Sweet. You want to see her?
She inside?
She's inside. She's the large one there of the three. And you can see she's dark, so it makes it tough to spot amongst.
Definitely big though.
She's definitely big. The piping. Yeah. And like kind of like their battle cry. I've heard it before in hives. It's pretty crazy. You can tell a difference, between this hive and the other. Oh yeah, but I didn't use any smoke last time. Smoke makes such a difference. Do you know at what point the mic died? Oh, okay. But it definitely was on for the last time and stuff. Holy smokes, we've been up here for that long? eventually to put me back.